it was. He was Chungang, I think. Is it Chungang, right?
Actually, not. I don't remember his name. I remember the case.
Yeah. Was one of the leading scientists in this field. And, when you're at that level, one of the issues is it's not just your own work, but you're leading, running a lab. And like any high-performing organization, whether you're a championship basketball team or you're a, trillion-dollar public-listed tech company, the team is vitally important, and it's not easy to put together a team. So, he was unable to do any research for, I believe, a couple years, while all this was unfolding. And as a result, he lost many of the people. They had to, move on, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. So, really just destroyed his professional career. And I think it sent a signal to many other Chinese American researchers, and in fact, here in Cambridge, I've had the opportunity to talk to a number of, very, very talented, productive scholars in a number of fields, and many of them are voting with their feet. They had previously been in the United States. I wouldn't say many, but certainly there are some. And there is, I think, a very real phenomenon of if you can, you want to get out of the U.S. As someone with high skills, a lot to contribute, that you're better off finding more congenial environments.
I'm looking at the introduction. You were at Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies. I've been doing quite a bit of research on the Belt and Road myself, and from what I can tell, Johns Hopkins has the most advanced research lab for the Belt and Road in the United States. Did you get an opportunity to look at some of the Belt and Road initiative participate?
No, so I was actually there long before the BRI was announced. So certainly not as a student. What I was able to do, SICE being located in downtown D.C. and actually not that far from the White House, is that, one of the, I think, privileges of being in a capital city is that you get so many people passing through, so the lectures, the more informal so-called brown bag lunches really were phenomenal. We even had Bill Clinton come to speak, but not anything BRI as a student, but certainly I do keep up with what's going on with the Belt and Road Initiative, and I agree with you. I think SICE does some great research. I think also in Africa as well. They do a good job.
You're listening to The Bridge.
I didn't give you, so this is everyone who is watching and listening, I didn't give you a heads up. I was going to ask you about the Belt and Road, but I was wondering if you could comment about, maybe a little bit about global infrastructure development, China financing, because you have an MBA, and you do know quite a bit about China. What are your comments about the Belt and Road Initiative? What do you think of this global phenomenon?
Well, I think, that we can understand the Belt and Road Initiative, of course, as a international relations diplomatic initiative. But I think we can also, and then this is well covered, but I think we can also look at it as a manifestation of Chinese values. So, one of the things that my book looks at is how does Chinese history, values, worldview affect its technological decisions today. And if we apply that kind of thinking to the Belt and Road Initiative, I think we can learn some interesting things. One is that there actually is a very clear continuation between imperial China, so the China of the Qing and the Han, which is the Qing first unified these various countries in a way that were like Europe into one country, of course we know as China today.
This is in BC. We're talking about 2,000 years ago, yeah?
Yes, maybe I would say 100-ish 200-ish BC, yes, so more than 2,000 years ago. But we see, a lot of this continuity. It's not just the language. So in the Qing, they developed the script, that we now call Hanzi, right, our Chinese characters. So anyway, the point being that at that time as well, to create a new national identity of being Chinese versus being, you weren't a citizen and you were a subject of, the pre-existing country. So think, as an analogy, you were German, you were French, but now you're this new identity, Europa or something, right? So to become Chinese, one of the important things the first Qing emperor had to do was create a new ideology, and this was based on Confucianism, and some scholars will say there were 5 texts, some others will say 6. But the point here being that these values were based on humanity and benevolence, and the worldview is being very pragmatic. So we see today, with, say, the United States, these notions of promoting freedom and human rights around the world, making the world safe for democracy. In some sense, these are not very pragmatic goals. They're, quite ideological. And the hallmark of China, I think, through these thousands of years, and certainly from 78 through today, with reform and opening, is both benevolence and pragmatism. And this is what motivates the Belt and Road Initiative. And I think, again, for people fortunate enough to live in the developed world, especially, what I call the weird countries, the Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic countries, they have no conception of this. But, if you don't have running water, if you don't have reliable electricity, if you don't have sanitation, if you don't have a road, your life is pretty awful, frankly. And what China's Belt and Road Initiative is set out to do, and is doing, is exactly providing what many people around the world absolutely need. They don't need democracy. They don't need freedom of the press, right? What they do need is economic prosperity, and they need stability. So this is what the BRI is designed to do, whether it's railways in Kenya, right? Whether it's, sanitation projects in Indonesia. So I think that, of course, this helps China win friends, but it also is a very clear and direct manifestation of these traditional Chinese values of benevolence and the worldview of pragmatism.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense.
You're listening to The Bridge.
Moving along, you've written an article, Reflections on China's Rise to Technology Leadership. In what ways do you see China becoming another pole of scientific innovation? This term innovation gets thrown around a lot in the U.S. regarding China, and I thought it would be interesting to get your view.
Sure. Well, in that article, I kind of share some of my experience over, maybe more than 20 years. And, around innovation and technology and innovation in China, and just the remarkable changes that have happened. Once upon a time in a previous life, I was working in venture capital, and, one of my jobs was to look for opportunities in China. And at that time, I think very naturally so, what made the most sense was to find something that worked in the United States and then replicate it in China. So, the joke, it was C to C, which most people at the time interpreted as consumer to consumer, like in eBay. But, that took on a new meaning in China. It was copy to China. So, the idea was, could you find a bright, hardworking group of people in China that could build the next Google, could build the next Facebook. And of course, as investors, what you're doing is you're always looking to increase your risk-adjusted return. Of course, we all understand that investors put in X amount of money hoping to get more out of it than they put in. But in a more sophisticated way, you also have to do your best to measure the risk. So if you have the chance to make 5x your money, you put in $100, you get $500 out. But you have one opportunity that requires 10 times the risk. Of course, you probably shouldn't do that. So the risk then, of course, is, why take technology risk? Why create something new if you already have something that works? So it was a very rational thing to do, but also I think it made sense given the state of China's technological development at that point. Now, if we look at today, we have companies that truly are innovative in a global, even civilizational way, I would argue. If we all know, we that live in China all know about WeChat and how it's become the remote control for our lives online and offline. And even today in the West, they haven't been able to achieve this, right? This level of integration, this level of convenience that people in China...
I think Musk recently said he was hoping he could try to copy WeChat.
Absolutely. Well, so a few years ago, there was a joke that if you want to know what Amazon is going to do in 2 or 3 years, look at what Alibaba is doing today. And I think Mark Zuckerberg has also publicly said as well that he looks at Chinese apps for ideas and inspiration. And of course it makes sense, right? I mean, China's not only an enormous market, but it is such a dynamic market, which makes it ferociously competitive. But as a consumer and as a business that consumes tech, this is great, right? And come up with new, better ways of doing things. But the criticism then, of course, was that of course at the time, what struck me, I was actually China can't innovate. Not that it's not ready or the conditions, the economic situation doesn't encourage innovation, but that very flatly and so emphatically, China cannot innovate, and that just struck me as very, very strange. Yeah, but then then when WeChat did what WeChat did, then the conclusion was that China can innovate, but only in China. Things that it can do can never really be widespread. Look at WeChat, right? It never really caught on in the U.S. or in Europe in the way that it did in China. Now, of course, you have the case of Huawei, which we touched on earlier, that Huawei, of course, unquestionably became a global leader in the technology space, not just in handsets, but in 5G equipment, and some other more narrow, but still technologically very significant fields as well. But now I think the real success story, I would say the next success story for China tech is TikTok, right? So many people that are not so technologically inclined or don't care about these questions might say, TikTok is just an entertainment app, of course incredibly addictive, yada, yada, yada. But if you really look at it, it is the first, or certainly, I said one of the first, but certainly the first company to use AI to become a globally successful consumer-facing product. Because you understand that TikTok doesn't need to rely on a social graph, meaning, like you look at Facebook, what makes it so effective is that it looks at what are your friends like to recommend things to you, with the assumption that, if your friends like it, you'll like it too. Now, that means, of course, if you don't have a lot of friends, Facebook's going to have a hard time recommending things to you, and it takes time, right? You have to build out your network on Facebook. And then what Douyin or ByteDance, the parent company of the Chinese TikTok did was they said, look, we can build this algorithm. At the time, super impressive. I think, somewhere I don't know if they publicly released this, but, many, many billions of parameters or variables. And all they needed was your own input that they could very quickly then kind of dial in, what exactly would captivate you. And again, this was all done essentially with AI. And this allowed the company to bridge, again, this culture gap to these weird countries, right? The Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic countries. And again, most people at the time would have said, it's impossible for a company from China, from India, from Indonesia to succeed in these, advanced markets with a cultural product because they just can't get it or it will be so expensive. You have to hire a U.S. team. You have to hire an Indian team. And what they did with ByteDance was they essentially abstracted the problem, right, to say we're actually going to just build an algorithm that can figure out what you want without us really having to know what do American teenagers like, what do Indian teenagers like. So, again, I think this should put to rest this notion that China cannot innovate. And, of course, you mentioned earlier space exploration. Clear an example of important technological breakthroughs and innovation.
You're listening to The Bridge.
Well, I guess this kind of, your answer leads into my next question. Do you think most Westerners have a solid foundation for understanding the Chinese acceleration in science that's been taking place in the last decade? So, people who are looking to partner in business and your just general Joe on the streets, do you think that they understand the degree to which Chinese science is accelerating and participating in the global economy?
My gut feeling is no. But, again, does it really matter, right? So for the average American, the average European, do they really need to know this? Hard to say. But what I think is important is that they, I think, perhaps develop a more complete understanding of China. I'm sure you know too, Jason, we've seen this downward spiral, not just in China-U.S. relations, but American perceptions of China and the Chinese. And I think these are not unrelated, that, it's unfortunate, but I think Western media has played a very important role here in poisoning the perceptions of many people around the world, certainly the Anglophone world, of poisoning people's perceptions against China. And, I think this is unfortunate. And, in fact, someone just, messaged me. One of the, things I'm fortunate that I have the opportunity to do as a researcher at a Chinese think tank like CCG, the Center for China Globalization, is I get a lot of opportunities to interact with diplomats, including ambassadors, government officials from other countries, academics, other think tank people, because of course everyone wants to better understand what China's doing and what it might do next. But, there's a lot of concern, not just amongst the Chinese about, these media tactics, but I've heard several times from very senior people that are not Chinese that this contributes to a worsening environment that could contribute to, in their words, World War III. I don't know if I would go so far as that, but still, again, I think this is related to, having the ordinary person, the average Joe, better understand China. And again, I think in a holistic way, values, the worldview is one based on benevolence. It's based on pragmatism, and that that if people could more understand this and accept it, that the world would be a better place.
You're listening to The Bridge.
Well, I mean, my next question is also related to this, because this is really what our show is about. So we see some, Joe Sixpack, I guess, in the U.S. and in China, maybe not always understanding one another as well as we'd all like. And certainly scientists who are working on silicon wafers, for example, they're going to see eye to eye with their colleagues wherever they are, because they're very focused on what they're doing. And if someone understands what they're doing, they're going to be very, open to working with people around the world who are also working on the same problem. But what about other kinds of intellects, like in the humanities, people who are studying global relations? Do you see communication working well between these kinds of intellectuals, or do you see communication breaking down as it is in other parts, like in media?
Well, so this is a complex question. I think you're right that we think about the hard sciences, the physical sciences, that generally speaking, their views and interests are in some sense more narrow. They want to work. If you're an American physicist or a Chinese physicist, you probably only care about working with the best physicists around the world in the pursuit of knowledge, in the pursuit of technological breakthroughs. And of course, argument or the counter-argument from those that have a broader perspective, and I would put people in the national security camp here, is that I don't think it's illegitimate or wrong for Americans, Chinese, British to say, you know what, we have to look out for our own national self-interest. And this might mean doing some things that will make some people unhappy, right? So I think, and this is, again, is the crux of the problem here with technology, is that it used to be, much easier to segregate these kinds of questions. So, I think from the U.S. perspective, the big challenge is, can it reimagine itself, not as, this unipolar, exceptional power, this hegemon, that can pretty much do whatever it wants, and everyone else just has to accept it, to becoming one of, if not many, but one of a few, where it will have very real constraints on what it's able to do, that are grounded in reality. If you are no longer the world's biggest economy, if you are no longer the clear technological leader in key areas, it logically follows, your ability to dictate certainly will go down. I think this is the disconnect we're seeing, that many in the U.S., certainly many U.S. politicians, have not made this, or at least have not explicitly acknowledged that, this may be the new reality, and are still living in the past. And this is, I think, makes it very dangerous. So, again, it's a very complex problem.
You're listening to The Bridge.
You work a lot with scientists in addition to diplomats. Do you see science, let me ask this in a broader way. What are some constructive ways that our civilizations can work together? What in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that's another great question. I think that greater openness and integration, certainly has been beneficial. We can probably place it under this rubric, globalization. But we also have to recognize that globalization is certainly not a new thing. Let's go back to the Belt and Road Initiative. This actually is, in some sense, besides a manifestation of this Chinese value of benevolence and, being very, very pragmatic, what should be done to actually improve the lives of people around the world. But it also is looking to, in a sense, recreate the ancient Silk Road. And so I think we can see here that greater connectivity, greater integration has generally been a good thing. And of course, it has some local costs. If you connect to a faraway source of manufacture that does it better and cheaper than you, some local people lose their jobs. And even going back to Roman times, I forget if it was Cicero or one of these Roman very notable people complaining about the Romans loving Chinese silk too much.
Yeah. I think that was Cicero.
Yeah.
To make their bodies sheen or something like
shimmery.
that. Shimmer, yeah.
Right. And so again, these problems are not new either, but I think overall, mankind benefits from greater integration. So we, adhere to this principle in an intelligent way. And I think, of course, this is, again, we can see Chinese pragmatism at work here in that, the U.S. has criticized China and in some cases acted very aggressively and provocatively because China does not follow the same ideological line as the United States. Whereas China has always said, look, we're ready to work with anyone as long as it's on the basis of mutual respect and, at the country level, respect for sovereignty, these kinds of issues that individuals typically don't worry about. But, we're willing to work with anybody. You can be a democracy, you can be, a country that is led by religious leaders, like Iran, and say, look, let's find a way to build a shared future. We don't need to have shared values, but, we can have our own values, we can have our own customs, etc., but let's work together to build a shared future. And I think, that makes a lot of sense whether we're talking about scientific collaboration, cultural collaboration, trade, investment, etc. And, of course, for CCG, this is where the Center for China Globalization falls on the ideological spectrum, right? So every think tank has some position it's advocating for. And, I think for CCG, it's more on the side of, greater openness and integration.
You're listening to The Bridge.
I wanted to talk about Qin Gang. He is now the Minister of Foreign Affairs, formerly the Ambassador of China to the United States, just a few weeks ago, actually. And he said recently that he was, quote, deeply impressed with his American colleagues. In terms of a relationship between the U.S. and China, you've lived in both places. How do you think individuals, people like you and me, can better support relationships between our nations and people?
So, I would say that certainly people-to-people relations matter a lot. And, what things you and I can do, I think, of course, is share, both sides, right? That, some things about China that may surprise, but also promote understanding. And I would actually say or empathy is very, very important on both sides. When we move to the level of diplomats and senior government officials, I would say that this is also very important. And, this might get into a little bit of a controversial academic question, which I don't think we'll get into here, but, in the world of international relations, there's different theories. And if you're a structural realist like John Mearsheimer, you say basically people don't matter, right? That countries act because they are in an anarchic environment and they have to protect their interests. So whoever's the leader doesn't matter. Let me share an interesting example. So I had dinner last night with Lord MacDonald, who is the former head of the British Foreign Ministry, Foreign Service, and we were talking, and some topics came up. There was also a few other people there. But that, something very, very interesting came up. So I asked, why do you think the transition from British hegemony to American hegemony went so smoothly, or did it go as smoothly as, I believe it went, or I understand that it went? And so the answer I got was very, very interesting. It was that people-to-people relations played a very, very important role. And, many people may know this. I may have known this, but I was reminded of it last night, that Winston Churchill was half American.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Wow. I might have read that somewhere long ago, but I didn't appreciate the significance of it. But that, as a result, he had an affinity for the Americans, and of course understood the Americans, very well. But also, it wasn't just him, but there was a lot of intermarriage between Americans and the British. So, of course, I think this created, maybe a cohort of people who had favorable views towards the other. And I think that made it much easier for the British to, accept that they no longer in the driver's seat. So, and unfortunately, I think we see the opposite phenomenon happening here with China and the U.S., right? That rather than, some channel for, there still are, of course, channels for people-to-people ties, but it seems that, deliberately or not, there seems to be, as part of this decoupling, is to force people further apart, not bring them together.
So increasing people-to-people exchanges via university mechanisms, work mechanisms, any kind that we can, may actually decrease global tension. That's really interesting.
Yeah, but also at the elite level as well, right? Again, if you have senior officials that have, lived in the counterparts, country positive. So we had Ray Dalio, the legendary investor, founder of Bridgewater Associates, and one of the largest, I don't know if it's the largest, but certainly one of the largest hedge funds, speak at our think tank recently. And, at the time, there was still a lot of uncertainty about China's economic outlook, and he predicted that he thought that in 2023, China would probably grow about 5%. The IMF recently upgraded its forecast for China's 2023 GDP growth, more in line with Ray's prediction estimate. So, again, I think that...
Das war unsere heutige Sendung. Vielen Dank fürs Zuhören und bis zum nächsten Mal. নীতি, রাজনীতি ও সমাজ সম্পর্কে নানা তথ্য।
Some catch-up, pent-up demand, that economic growth will be pretty strong. I'm more focused on the medium to longer term for China's economic growth, and I actually see a lot of reasons, structural reasons, to be positive besides the cyclical rebound from COVID. But we probably don't have time to go into it. But I'll leave it there. I think 2023 will be a strong year for China. I think the longer-term economic outlook is also more positive than I think is commonly reported.
I know that your time is scarce and that you are a very, very busy person. Thank you so much for making time for us. Thank you for joining the bridge. Andy Monk.
My pleasure, Jason.
होने वाले असेंबली इंतखाबात के लिए तमाम इंतजामात मुकम्मल कर लिए गए हैं। भारत की मर्दों की क्रिकेट टीम पहली मर्तबा इंटरनेशनल क्रिकेट में तमाम 3 फॉर्मेट्स में
Not unto us, O Lord, not unto...
Engineers and roading crews are checking bridges and clearing roads throughout both Holy Tibet.
Uzak Doğu'dan Esintiler programı ve son bölümde Çin'den müzik esintileri programını dinleyebilirsiniz.
والصناعات المختلفة. Will be handed over to Sierra at present, then distributed through the quick hit areas.
Official data shows the annual per capita disposable income of Chinese farmers rose to a new high in 2022. The figure increased to over 20,100 yuan, or about $3,000 surpassing 20,000 yuan for the first time. Wages and salaries accounted for over 40% of farm incomes. According to the National Rural Revitalization Administration, China's annual per capita disposable income of farmers in areas just emerging from poverty grew 7.5% in 2022. China started the second phase of its deep space observation radar facility. Beijing Institute of Technology said the new phase of the China Compound Eye facility is expected to be completed in 2025. It added that the 3-phase project is set to be the world's most far-reaching radar facility, capable of observing and capturing high-resolution images of deep space objects. United Nations Satellite Center has activated its emergency mapping service in quake-hit areas in Turkey to aid relief efforts. It invited a research team from Wuhan University to map the lights in the areas at night using remote sensing data to help better analyze disaster situations in different areas and allocate relief resources. A professor with the university says the changes in the lights can directly reflect the scale of damage in different cities and can be used to assess disaster capabilities. The professor also says in the case of resource shortages, it can play an important role in the formulation of more targeted rescue strategies. Reserve Bank of Australia Governor Philip Lowe says he's sorry about the pain of 9 consecutive interest rate hikes, but he says the decisions are necessary to tackle inflation. Greg Navarro has more from Sydney.
Reserve Bank of Australia Chairman Philip Lowe made his first public appearance of the year, this one before a Senate Estimates Committee where he was grilled for hours about his judgment and management of the nation's monetary policy. That's because since May of last year, when the nation's cash rate was at a record low of 0.1%, there have been 9 consecutive interest rate hikes, the current rate now sitting at 3.35%. Lowe said the primary goal of the RBA is to tame inflation, currently sitting at about 7.8%, to try to bring it down to the RBA necessary, and that there would be more in the coming months. Now, Lowe was forced to apologize last year when he said there would be no interest rate hikes in Australia until 2024. Clearly, that was not the case, and as a result, he had to make that apology because a lot of people apparently took out mortgages, which they are now paying more for as a result of all of that.
In sports, the FIFA presidents revealed that the Club World Cup tournament is set to extend to 32 teams in 2025.
Coming months, but for now we have decided place in.
Infantino also says Saudi Arabia will host this year's FIFA Club, the first time for the Middle East country to hold the tournament. And that's the news. I'm Shane Bigham.
Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
And Russia and attends the 59th Munich Security Conference.